state of Colorado, John Hickenlooper.
And Dave Query sent me a text this morning saying, whatever you do, don't wear a necktie. It's going to be blue jeans. So put on a pair of blue jeans and an old Wing Coop t-shirt. I was already out the door by the time that text came. I thought I'd just spend like a quick 10 minutes just to give you kind of a universal framework of how I look at the relationship between restaurant experience and restaurants and the restaurant world and politics. And when we started the Wine Coop, I came out here as a geologist. That's the thing that John didn't mention. I'm the only governor, we think the only professional governor in the history of the country that has a master's in geology. And I came out and spent 5 years getting to hike over the most beautiful landscapes you could ever imagine, trying to figure out where there were natural resources. Price of oil collapsed, the company got sold, I got a decent severance. So I couldn't find a job, so I ended up seeing a brew pub in California. At that time, there were only 3 brew pubs in North America. This place was called Triple Rock on Shattuck Avenue, still there. And anyway, I came back and was talking to people about it. Everyone got excited, said, you ought to open a brew pub. And I had never worked a day in a restaurant in my life at that point. My mom was a Depression child, so we never went to a restaurant when I grew up. Until I was out of high school, I went to a restaurant once a year when my uncle would come to town, and it was the Viking Inn, which had a smorgasbord. So you'd pay, I'm not making this up, $4, I think it was $4.25. That was all you could eat. And so my mom, when we went to one restaurant a year, that was it. Anyway, so I started talking to people about it, and a friend of mine, a guy named Mark Stevens, still here. At that time, he was a producer for McNeil Lehrer, but he wasn't a rich guy. He was making probably 50 grand a year, but he said, you should do that, I'll invest 10 grand. And he's a smart guy. I figured, if he'd invest, it must be a good idea, I better check it out. So I went to, 2 things happened. Went to the library with a buddy, and we got out a book on how to write a business plan. And I, honest to God, didn't know what the word pro forma meant, right? I didn't know anything about a spreadsheet or a balance sheet or any sheet. I knew about 4 sheets to the wind. I had a lot of experience in bars and restaurants by that point. And then the other thing, a guy named Patrick Ling, who had opened 2 years before the Pearl Street Grill. And he, for whatever kind reason, we had a mutual friend, took me in and let me spend 4 meetings with his bookkeeper so that I could see what their sales were, what the sales came from, and where they spent their money. And so I could understand how this thing worked. Now, remember, I was a geologist, but I was also, as a geologist where you sit in a room and make maps, I am, on any of those Myers-Briggs things, I'm the biggest extrovert. As extroverted as many of you in this room are, I am sure, there can't be anybody more extroverted than I am. And I was kind of excited about actually being in a restaurant, having a reason to be there day after day. And so we decided we're going to the brew pub, go back to the historic way of making beer. And I'd worked my way through graduate school as a geologist, renovating old buildings. So we decided we'd go look for historic buildings. And back then, a brew pub was considered an industrial use. So you had to be in either I-1 or I-2 zoning, which meant somewhere right along the Platte Valley there where the train tracks went, which turned out okay because that's where Lodo was. And so you could get the first 3 blocks of, you could get Wine Coop and Wazee and Blake Street were all in that I-2 zoning. So I thought that was cool. I said, if you're going to go back to the historic way of making beer, what a great excuse to have to restore and renovate a historic building. So we went and leased the building. I actually spent 9 months trying to put a deal together for a building at 23rd and Blake, which was the last standing, still there, last standing Pony Express stables. It was called the Pacific Express building. Now it's, I think, offices. Anyway, the rent was $4 a square foot, so it was cheap. It was, this and that. The landlord was going to put 100 grand into it. Couldn't get investors. Now, someone could have pointed out to me that it was across the street from the roughest homeless shelter in Colorado at that point. And maybe that was influencing my smarter investors not to invest. Anyway, we failed there, and literally I was going to give up. I've been working on this thing. I had a business plan. We had a cool logo. and I was going to give up on this thing. And that same day that I told the landlord at the Pacific Express stables that we weren't going to continue to pursue it, I went and met a guy named Charlie Woolley, who was a young broker, just out of, I mean, literally his first job, one of his first buildings, and he had a building at the corner of 18th and Wine Coop, which is where the Wine Coop Brewing Company is now. And we walked in, looked at it, and the lease, the landlord was willing to go for $1 a square foot per year to get somebody into the building, and he would allow us to own 12.5% of the building if we put at least $300,000 in the building total, or that wasn't even that much, it was $200,000. So we went back to work, we redid the plans, got a designer. I mean, all in all, from the moment I first saw Brewpub and kind of started talking about it, till when we finally opened, October 18th, 1988, it was 2 years and 4 months. I mean, that's how long it took, where I was living on, I think I was consulting a little bit on these friends would hire me to do stupid geology things, but I think I made $6,000 one year and $7,000 the other year. I had unemployment the first year. I had my severance, so I wasn't destitute. But I had a house up in Northwest Denver and had 3 roommates. So we were all kind of living it's like a commune. I'm sure many of you have been there. I'm sure some of you are living like that right now. Anyway, so we got open, you know, and you guys, 70 hours a week, year after year, the first 4 or 5 years. I mean, we had a crowd in the beginning, but then we had a little problem that we didn't know what we were doing. So we had lots of customers. I mean, I think this is such a sin. After having been in the restaurant business for 15 years, I understood that if you're doing a lot of business and not making a profit, that's a sin. Because you're taking profit away from somebody else, and you're just flowing. And sometimes you can't do anything about it. And I've been in restaurants that failed, and there's nothing worse than to have all this business come through and then have it decline and fail, knowing that should be profit somebody else. But that's the capitalism. After 5 years, they opened Coors Field. We played at Mile High Stadium, the old football stadium, and our sales went up 50%. And then 2 years later, despite the fact that I had argued that we wanted Lodo to be residential, a village, and we didn't want any stinking baseball stadium to bring in drunk crowds, and I told them they should build it down where now the Pepsi Center is. Luckily, no one listened. Because baseball crowds turn out to be families, and they're not a bunch of drunken fools, and they would walk through lower downtown and say, this is the coolest place in the whole world, and I want to come back here. Anyway, in 95, they opened Coors Field. Our sales went from 4.4 million to 6.6 million. And let me just say, when you've covered your rent, your mortgage, most of your payroll, and suddenly 50 or 60% of your new sales are beer, it was really good. I mean, I can't ever describe after, you know, and I always feel guilty because I have friends like Dave who are much smarter than I am, much better, know more about food, more talented leaders and managers, know 100 times more about the restaurant business. Very, very few people have been in a situation like that where we had, 1996, we had $1.3 million of cash flow, positive cash flow that came to our bottom line. I mean, and I have no illusions that I'm good, right? No illusions. As my grandfather said, you gotta work hard your whole life, but it's better to be lucky than to be good. And it really is. It's a true statement. So by this time, we'd opened a brew pub in Fort Collins, Cooper Smith's in Phantom Canyon, in Colorado Springs. We did the Upstream Brewing Company in Omaha. We went out and started trying to open brew pubs all over the place, which was a huge pain in the ass. And, you know, I think many of you know this, have learned it one way or the other. You're always going to do better doing leasing buildings, building businesses where you really know yourself. Unless you want to do franchises, and you've got the greatest concept in the world. So we learned that the hard way. And then we came back, and we got in this battle on saving the name Mile High, the Mile High Stadium name. You know, you look on a map, we are the Mile High City. There's no place on a map that says Mile High except Mile High Stadium. It was so weird. And we did a valuation. We got Ernst & Young to do a valuation. What is that brand name worth? Anyway, after that, after we got the compromise at Vesco Field at Mile High, all these people convinced me that I should run for mayor. And I don't know, I was guaranteed that if I only did a positive campaign, I would never lose. And I thought we would take the lessons of small business into government. And the key one, and I'll finish with this because I think it'd be better just to get the discussion. The key question was, the key issue to me, that I think every executive elected official, every governor, every mayor, should spend at least 2 years managing a high volume restaurant. Because you learn, before anything else, that there's no margin in having enemies. No matter how unreasonable, no matter what idiotic arguments one of your unreasonable customers makes, you'll do everything you can to make sure that they leave knowing you care about the relationship, that relationship is important to you. Because, I don't know, for me it was about 3.5 months into the business, and some guy, just outrageous, I mean, he wanted a dinner for 4, all picked up at comp because they waited around for 10 minutes to get their dessert. And he was that outraged. I said, I don't care what, pay the tab and go on. I don't care if you're unhappy. That's so stupid. For months I would hear about this guy was all over town saying what a jerk I was and what a horrible restaurant we had. And by the time I'd hear about it, it was a couple of weeks later. I mean, it was like having a cancer out there that you couldn't control. Anyway, politicians, think about that.
That's now called Yelp.
Yeah, that's now called Yelp. Politicians are the opposite. So my point being that you learn the restaurant business, there is no profit. There is no margin in having enemies. Just, there's not, in any sense. You do restaurateurs are the most compromising, willing to listen, amiable, malleable people that I know. Politicians are the opposite. They try to define themselves on who their enemies are. They try to see how badly they can do attack ads and put them down. And no wonder the system is so screwed up right now. It's because we've allowed attack ads and this kind of ridiculous confrontational. It's like so many of them are lawyers, right? Somebody told me 66%, 2/3 of all the elected officials in the United States are lawyers of one sort or another. That's a disaster.
So I started to talk about this when John first walked in. This partnership between Eat Denver Sage and Emily Griffith started. The program modeled off similar construction program that Emily Griffith had with the construction industry. Curriculum was built by restaurant industry, including Megan Godey from Sage, Jamie Fader, Jen Jasinski, Adam, Matt Nelson. Launched the pilot round in January with 25 students in the first round and 500 people on the waiting list. So a great response. The first group graduated February 3rd. We've got people in our stores now from that first group. No money was spent on advertising. Students found out through the media, Denver Business Journal, etc. Currently in the third cycle of classes with 2 cohorts of up to 25 students each, and they'll have a hiring fair on Wednesday and graduate on Friday. Office of Economic Development has financed the first 3 cycles of this program, and we're waiting on a federal grant from the Work Act, which will kick in the next class, which begins on May 1st. Each cycle is 4 weeks long, Monday through Friday, 5 to 9, and includes serve-safe training, daily knife skills practice, recipe, 2 to 3 guest chefs from the community volunteering. In its first year, 400 to 500 people will go through the program, and over 25 Eat Denver chefs are involved with this. So this could just launch into a massive success for us in the restaurant industry. Dana and I were in Miami last week. Tons of restaurants, hotels. They seem to be just beaming with staff. No one was bitching about labor. No one was complaining about how tough things were. But this is a huge issue for us. So that can kind of launch me into the first. You kind of covered a lot of the. I was going to do a little history on your wine coop. I was living in Berkeley when Triple Rock opened. It was pretty cool.
I didn't know that.
When you opened the wine coop, there were 4 restaurants in Lodo. Super sketchy. Union Station was downright dangerous to be around. And to your point about community, I was talking to Barb McFarland last night. She is part owner with Pete of Marzix and was John's first partner with the beer maker Russell. You had this sense of community early on. Your menus were like it was a newspaper.
Yeah.
And you started advertising other restaurants on your menu, much to the dismay of your partners, because you Why would you do something like that? For free, you're advertising other restaurants on your menu.
Well, we did both on the menu and then in the vestibule, we would advertise McCormick's, Wazi Supper Club,
La Coupole.
La Coupole. There was just a handful of other restaurants in Lodo, and my staff said, I can remember they came in and said, listen, Hickenlooper, we understand you never worked in a restaurant, but wake up. You can't, it's competitive, you can't advertise your competition. I said, well, maybe those other few restaurants down here are not our real competition. Maybe our real competition is the TV set. Maybe our job is to get people off the couch and out the door and to enjoy life with their friends and their family. And if we do a good enough job and these other restaurants like La Coupole do a good enough job, people will go out more often, more frequently, and come to this part of town, which right now we don't have a critical mass. Maybe that'll be a rising tide that raises all ships. And trust me, I did not convince any of them, not one of them bought into that until a couple years later. And everyone always thinks that Coors Field made Lodo. By the time Coors Field opened in '95, there were already 40 restaurants in Lodo, right? There were, I think 5 is the number I always use, but 5 restaurants in Lodo when we first opened. So we were the 6th. I mean, that's a huge transformation. Now, Coors Field, no denying, became the biggest catalyst anybody ever dreamed, because it really was like a marketing engine. One of the things we did, which was really smart, us little restaurant guys in Lodo and some other business owners and property owners, we lobbied the stadium district commission, the people building the stadium, that they shouldn't put one of those huge lakes of parking lots around the stadium. Because we had along 18th Street, all the skyscrapers are along 17th, and so 18th is where all the parking garages are, and there were 5 of them down right close to lower downtown. So we said, look at that. Holy smokes, you've got, whatever it was, 26,000 parking spaces. If you include the shuttle, right, then you have, I think it was 40,000 parking spaces that, almost every game are going to be empty. Let's utilize already the asset we have and not put a bunch of parking spaces around the stadium, which of course had the benefit of saving the stadium district money, so they bought into this. And what happened was people did park away from the stadium and walk through lower downtown and see a historic district, buildings at a human scale that was clean and safe. And the most amazing thing to me, when Coors Field opened in 1995, and that first month, and when I saw that our sales were 50%, in April, May, June, July, stayed at 50% all summer long. Games were sold out almost all summer long. Came to September, October, and back then, just as now, you didn't have to worry about the Rockies playing into October. Right? Their season ended right in the beginning of October. Our sales stayed up 50% in October and stayed up 50% in November and 50% in December. In other words, people had gotten into the habit of walking through lower downtown, and it had become a real destination. And that's the real gift that Coors Field gave, was it did the equivalent of probably $10 million worth of advertising to get people to just come down and experience the place. You guys know how hard you have to work to get people in your restaurant the first time, that first guest experience. We got it as a gift.
So you got it early, and when we opened Jack's, you were very gracious. '96, you welcomed us into the tribe.
I wasn't happy about it. I like to promote it back when there weren't that many restaurants. You don't want to see really talented people come in and compete against you.
So back then, you could drive off of I-25 on the 15th Street Viaduct, and you could drop right down onto Wine Coop and 15th. There are these very few restaurants. You open up, and on opening day, you serve free lunch. Is the room. Line around the block. You're off and running, and it kind of took off. No real lull. You were the first brew pub in Colorado, and it just took off from there.
But the funny story, when we first opened, of course, we renovated Wine Coop from an empty warehouse to a restaurant kitchen, a brewery, all that stuff. Everything, equipment leases, loans, cash, everything we spent was $575,000. And $175,000 was the brewery, which we bought brand new. Everything else, all the equipment, everything else was used.
And how many square feet was that?
And we utilized about rough justice, almost about 9,000 square feet. So we did the 9,000 square feet for about $20 a square foot. That's what our renovation budget was. So we did scrubbing and painting and sanding, everything we could do ourselves. And even so, when we got to opening day, it was, I mean, we owed the contractor about 45 grand. According to my business plan that I created, we're supposed to have $100,000 to market. One thing you should never do is, open a restaurant without marketing money. Good advice. So, so we decided that we had to do something special, and we decided we were going to go back to the same price, since we were the first brewery to open in Denver since Prohibition, the first new brewery. We were going to go back and go back to the pre-Prohibition prices of beer. So for opening night, this is the night before we actually opened the restaurant for food, but for opening night we were going to sell 25-cent glass of beer, which was basically, we got these 8-ounce paper plastic cups. And we thought it'd be great. Dick Kreck, who was the kind of man about town columnist, in the bottom of his column said, for the best 25-cent beer in town, check out Colorado's first brew pub, the Wynkoop Brewing Company, the corner of 18th and Wynkoop. That's all he said, one sentence. So we had this line around the block, all these people coming in. My partner was driving down to King Soopers, 2 different King Soopers, to buy more plastic cups. So in the end, we sold 6,000 cups of beer on that opening night, and by 9 o'clock at night, all I could think about to myself was, damn, I wish I'd said 50 cents. But anyway, then the next day, we opened it up. We were going to have a free beer, a free lunch for everybody to come in, and the place was just overwhelmed. And of course, we had one of the very first POS systems, which of course we bought used from a restaurant that had failed on Larimer Square, and of course it froze at about 12:05. So all the orders that were in got locked out. We couldn't find the paper. It was, oh my God. So I would go table to table to table to table, saying, actually it wasn't free. They were paying for lunch, because I walked up to her and I said, I am so sorry, this lunch is on your, I bought 40 lunches that day, and I kept saying, this will never happen again, this will never happen again. I got this one, the last guy, and he looked at me and goes, Hal, this is your first day in the business, isn't it? I go, yeah, and it was Sam Arnold, who owned the fort. And he said, trust me, this is going to happen again.
He would know. Yeah. All right, a couple more questions about that, and then we'll move off there was, in talking to Barb, she mentioned something about the running of the pigs. Can you explain that? Just to give a little backstory on early day marketing ideas and
one of our
baller moves on the part of young brewers.
We decided, so we were taking our spent grain, and we didn't want to waste it, so we found Carl's Home Dairy in East Lake, Colorado. Would come down, and once a week we'd pile up, and we had a trailer, and we'd give them all our spent grain. They'd take it up, feed it to their pigs. So we got back to we're coming up to our first anniversary, and we said, what a great idea, we'll do a blue plate pig special. And we'll get one of the pigs that's been eating our grain. It'll be a virtuous cycle. So that'll be, for whatever it was, $8, you can come down and you'll have a wonderful, the whole Saturday was our anniversary party. Well, the guys from Carl's Home Dairy came down, they brought a couple little piglets and put a little pen out in the alley just so people could see the pigs. So, and we got some really unhappy customers because they'd walk by and see with their kids, they'd see these little piglets, and then out on Wynkoop Street there was one of those open spits. So there's the pig roasting. We got little piglets. People said, I don't want my child to see that. I said, well, where do you think? You don't want your child to know where the food comes from? What are you, crazy? And that was before I quite really figured out there's no margin in having enemies. Actually, I was more diplomatic by that point. Anyway, Dave, one of our bartenders, what was Dave's last name? I can't remember. God. Anyway, these people that were part of your family 25 years ago now through a mist. Dave said, you know what we ought to do? Next year, let's get the Carl's guys to bring a few more piglets. And by piglets, they're, a 6-month-old pig is about 50 pounds or 60 pounds. They're boisterous. He says, let's bring them down and we'll get those kind of guard dog harnesses on them. and we'll get the celebrities, like the newspaper reporters and the TV weather person, and we'll do a race of pigs around the block, and we'll call it the running of the pigs. Which he said to us as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. So we did it. We did it the next year, and it was hysterical. I mean, all the TV people came down, the TV personalities, the reporters. The pigs are wee, 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 wee. They're screaming and yelling. We run the pigs around, and the Bill Houston, who was a columnist then, he wrote about it. He called it Pamplona on the Platte. The Wynkoop's annual running of the pigs. And so this went on until PETA found out, right? The people for the ethical treatment of animals, and they said, "How could you suffer those pigs?" We said, "Well, the pigs are gonna." Anyway, for several years they came down and picketed us, and we didn't really worry too much until at a certain point they began getting a real network. This is right when email, 1998, 1999, email became, you could begin to get networks, and they got video of one of the pigs with a drop of blood. The pig had gotten his little cloven hoof in a grate and pulled it out, and there was a little cut. And so that pig didn't. And by this time, responding to PETA, it was no longer who could win the race. It was which team could give their pig the most pleasure. And so we call it. Some people call it the running of the pigs. Some people called it the pleasuring of the pigs. Which was, so we'd have a parasol. We'd have little rest stops so they could have some slops along the way. Anyway, the PETA said, "We're going to ruin you. You hurt this pig." And we could see the writing on the wall. This was not something that was going to last long term. So I said, "Well, how can I make this whole?" And the guy says, "We want you to set the pigs free." I said, "Well, there are 12 pigs out there. What do you mean set them free?" They said, "Well, we have up in Loveland, we have a farm for retired dairy and farm animals where they can live out their life without stress and not ever worry about being eaten." I said, "Well, I don't think they worry about." Never mind. Anyway, so I had to go over to the guys with Carl's and say, "Bill, how much for those pigs?" He goes, "Which pigs?" I said, "The little piglets." He goes, "Well, they're about 60 pounds a piece, 40 cents a pound at this age, so 24 bucks a pig. There are 14 of them, so $450, something like that." I go, "I'd like to buy them." He goes, "What? What are you going to do with 14 pigs?" I said, "I'm going to set them free." And we did. They brought down a little tractor trailer, a little 60-foot paddle truck, not a tractor trailer, put a ramp down, and those pigs went off and lived. The guy at Carl said, "Those pigs aren't bred to have a happy life, right? They're bred to get really big. Their legs won't be able to hold them in 2 or 3 years." But I can tell you, honest to God, he's wrong, because those pigs, I went and visited the pigs like 5 years later, and half of them were still alive. They didn't move too quick, but they looked pretty happy.
I've been pretty vocal about the rent costs in Denver and Boulder. We as restaurateurs try and find the next hot location. We go down there. You perfect example. You went to Lodo. You threw down mad money, big risk, and now all of a sudden, from your $1 per square foot rental rate, we're at $50 a foot with 6% of gross to the developer, to the landlord. This is really challenging, and so the very nature of our risk becomes the benefit. Danny Meyer closed Union Square, had to move it to a different location after 30 years because the landlord in this iconic New York City restaurant wanted to go, what?
5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Wanted to raise the rent, so he left.
By 50%.
By 50%. So what do we do, and how do we, what's the next hot new corridor from a transportation standpoint? If you were going back into the restaurant business, where would you go? And B, you gave me this advice a long time ago, you should always own your building. How do we all continue to make that happen?
So when I sold out, so I put all my restaurants, and at that time we owned the Wazee Supper Club, we owned the Goosetown Tavern, we owned a bunch of restaurants. I think we had a dozen restaurants in Denver when I got elected mayor in 2003. We put them in a trust, and yet still people thought I had self-interest, so I sold everything in 2007. obviously this whole thing has changed since Trump, this notion of conflict of interest. Clearly I overreacted. But anyway, when I sold my business to my partner, we broke down where the value of the assets of what our company was, and we owned the buildings in 3/4 of our enterprises. 80% of the money that I received was for the appreciation of the real estate, right? 80%. So we had profitable restaurants in every single place. But I was lucky enough that we owned the real estate in these places, and I'll give you just one frame of reference. Let's say that you own the building or you don't own the building, but you got a restaurant that's doing $1 million a year and it's cash flowing. It's a great restaurant. Let's say it's cash flowing 100 grand or 150 grand a year, right? Let's say you got cash flowing 100 grand a year. If you sell that restaurant, you'll get a multiple of that cash flow. If you're lucky, you'll get 5 times what that cash flow is. So you'll get 500 grand for your business if you don't own the building. If you own the building and you've been open more than 5 years, you could basically find all kinds of commercial mortgage companies that will give you right now 10 or 12 times that cash flow if you classify it as rent to on a long-standing lease, right, of an established business. And there's clear language, and insurance companies and all these different investment funds will give you 10, 12, sometimes 14 times your cash flow instead of 5 times your cash flow. So owning your business is, if you could possibly do it, and you know what we did right from the beginning, we got that 12.5% ownership in the building for putting all that capital in because we were in the high risk area. Almost no landlord will do that anymore. But there are ways you can find to make sure they understand that you're going to kill yourself to make their real estate more valuable, and you feel you deserve a better shake. And that's all. I mean, the sooner you get into an area and can own the building, the better. Unfortunately, places where the real estate is still pretty cheap, generally those are owners who've owned the real estate for a long time, and they're hard to find them willing to sell. We bought the whole Wynkoop building, all 5 floors in the basement, so 6 floors really, for $11 a square foot in 1991. Right literally, I shook hands on the deal before they announced we were going to get a Major League Baseball team. And I was very lucky that the guy didn't back out on the deal. He dragged his heels. We didn't actually get a sales contract signed by him for 1.5 years. It took that long to close the deal, but it was still for the same price we'd agreed to. But he's the exception, not the rule. If you can possibly find, I think along Colfax, right, from Broadway out for the first 25 blocks, go find somebody who knows real estate and do these little pie diagrams and look at what real estate costs, how close to downtown, look at what rents are, and then look for those shadow spots. Everything's moving into downtowns now, all over the United States. So find those shadows where it's still affordable, where it hasn't jumped up. And in Denver right now, South Broadway, that's pretty much gone. You go out to Rhino and up to the north side, all of a sudden that's exploded. There's still some value out there, but it's expensive. Colfax, still relatively inexpensive. And there are reasons why they should be or not, but obviously, when I signed the lease for the Wynkoop, when there was $1 a square foot per year, there were good reasons why it was so cheap. That was the market, and everyone thought that nothing would ever work. Nothing had worked down there. So we were kind of the lucky people that we were just lucky. We worked hard, but we were lucky. There are spots, I guarantee you, there's spots like that now. You just have to find them.
I think my question is more, watching the growth of Colorado and seeing all the new money come to the state and watching how challenging it is not only to find people, but now we're paying $55,000 for a kid who just walked out of school who thinks he's ready to be a manager, and for us it's not sustainable. Do you think us here in the room should still feel comfortable with the sustainability and the growth of Colorado, or do you think we're in a bubble, and do you think we should feel comfortable continuing to invest in this state, just watching all of these changes and how quickly it's changing?
Certainly the risk reward changes from year to year, and that's really when you're trying to open a new restaurant, you've got to look at the risk and the reward. How much is the risk you're going to fail, and how big a reward do you get if you succeed? And there's got to be a good leverage there. we are the #1 economy in America, right? U.S. News and World Report came out and said that two weeks ago. Forbes has said we're the #1 place for business and careers for the last 2 years. We're on fire. Is that sustainable? Maybe not being #1, but we're going to be #1, 2, or 3 for a long time. I mean, I think we've got all the ingredients. I think the state has branded itself. Denver has branded itself. We got 1,000 miles of bike trails in metropolitan Denver now. You got more live music venues in Denver than there are in Nashville or Austin. We're still going to be a destination. Now, what you should go is go look at those cities where they've been having this kind of growth for years. So go to San Francisco, go to Boston, go to Seattle for certainly the last 10 years. They've been growing as fast as we are. Generally, what people tell you there is it gets more competitive, but it's still sustainable. In other words, the growth will continue. It just is more competitive, and that sucks, right? That's the thing that always drove me nuts about that. That's why when I talked at the beginning about having a restaurant that's got a lot of sales but doesn't make a profit, that's like a sin, right? There's something wrong with that because the universe is so competitive. My feeling is once you've got your restaurant, you really have given up on it, it's not going to make a profit, close the son of a gun, right? Let somebody else try who could maybe make a profit, but allow those sales to go somebody else. And usually if you're not making a profit, it's because you're not giving a good enough combination, a good enough experience to people, to be honest. And then the only reason to keep somebody open is if they're giving good experiences so people go out more often. Now, that's what's really driving the restaurant industry all across the country right now is people continue every year, people going out more frequently, a little more than they did in the past. And that's a great thing. People just don't want to cook as much. They don't want to be in their small little apartment. They want to go out and experience a...
Sales finally in 2016 increased. Restaurant sales were higher than grocery store sales in America last year.
Is that true?
First time ever.
I can't imagine that's true. Is that true?
In the Atlantic magazine on Monday.
Wow.
That was the fact.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got to go back to work. So what you guys are all doing is the Lord's work, and keep it up.